the restaurants, the books, the TV shows. Marcus Samuelsson just doesn't stop.
I reminisce for a spell, or shall I say think back 22 years ago to keep it on track. The birth of a child on the 8th of October.
Marcus, you're the winner of Top Chef Masters. Congratulations.
You have just become the Chopped All-Stars Grand Champion.
Yes! Please welcome Iron Chef Marcus Samuelsson! I'm going across the country to see how food connects us all across the United States. Be inclusive, be friendly, be community driven. You're no one without your community.
Welcome to Harlem Meetup.
I feel like I'm living the dream that I wanted to establish for myself. Once you do that, you should be lucky and grateful, and I am those two things every day.
Nice. All right. Good morning. How's everybody doing? First of all, I thought Will's talk was absolutely amazing. It's so great to see so many people of hospitality in the room. I was fortunate enough to work with Diego last year in New York, and that was absolutely amazing. When you think about origin stories, I really want to go back to a couple of places for me. With food, you know, I was born in Ethiopia, where food is such an enormous central part of everybody's day to day, from getting the food, from getting water. On the most rudimental level, food is also, in large part, in Africa. You think about food based on a spiritual compass, but also based on a tribal compass. Those other layers that we may or may not think about so much in this part of the world. And even that part for me still has a lot of impact when I think about how we're going to cook something at Metropolis or Havmar or even at Red Rooster. So going from Ethiopia to Sweden, I went from spices, dry food, search for water, to a place where it was like salt, herring, no spices. But food was still so central. And it wasn't because of my mom, I love my mom, but it was really because of my grandmother. And she was the one that was cooking real traditional Swedish husmanskost, which is really this daily menu that exists still in Sweden, whether you get it at lunch at your school. There is kind of this calendar of working class, working man's food, which very often has just potatoes, maybe a little bit of vegetables, and very often something cured, let's say a fish, or let's say a ham. But this menu is still, as much as Nordic cuisine has been now, for the last 20 years, really been known all over the world, but husmanskost is still something that we have in Sweden. And it really shaped my flavors and my way of thinking about food, right? So origin food for me, I think about Ethiopia, I think about Sweden, and in many ways, they're minority cuisines. And I understand why Sweden is a minority cuisine. It's a country of 9-10 million people. But then to understand why Ethiopia would be a minority cuisine, it's a country of, population of 110 million people. But in the world of hospitality, it is. Once I started cooking in Sweden, pretty quickly I realized in order to meet my ambition and meet the opportunities, I needed to leave Gothenburg. I needed to leave Sweden. And where I was working, some of the older guys, when they were like 24 and 25, those were some of the oldest people I knew, because I was 17, 18. But they've traveled already. They've been to France. They've been to London. And they told me about that fact that you can travel with cooking. And just a concept that you can do what we do here, but to travel all over the world, that was so fascinating to me. So I started working on a cruise ship, and it took me all over the world. And pretty quickly I realized that there was one cuisine that everybody was running for, and then there was a couple of other cuisines that everybody ate. The French cuisine was obviously the food that we learned and practiced, and I loved the techniques about French cooking, but I didn't like it. Once I started to travel, and what I liked, once I got off the ship, in Acapulco to have Mexican food, or in Singapore to have foods of the hawker stands, right? And I was like, these noodle dishes for $2, for me, tasted much, much better than something that we did in the restaurants or we did in the high-end world. So I knew there was a big difference between kind of what's supposed to be what's good food, and this question was always asked, but is it good food? And I was always confused about this. What do you mean it's good food? What I had in the hawker stand, that was good food, but there was no book, there was no place to really get acknowledged that that's good food. And we still are living in that moment. As much as I've changed, we still are kind of figuring out what is considered good food. And that's why it's so great to have conferences like this, where the majority of that conversation is going to be asked and challenged constantly. And I think the only way to move forward in hospitality is really to challenge that question: what is considered good food? When I got to France, I always wanted to work in a 3-star Michelin restaurant. I got the chance to work in a 3-star Michelin restaurant. It was incredible. It was outside Lyon, in a small village called Vonas. And after I'd done my year, I went to chef, and chef had all the commis lined up, and you basically get a stamp, you get your papers, you go home for 3 months, and then you come back. And one of the great things of being a commis is that you pay no tax because you don't get paid for a year. So I worked in France, but in many places, and I didn't pay tax. Not because I didn't want to pay tax, because we never got paid. And I'm like, you work really, really hard, you learn a lot. I didn't have a lot of money, but you'd want to get paid a little bit, Reese, but that was absolutely not. But one of the things that the chef said to me that was a defining moment was that I told him, I really enjoyed working here, but I have to go. And he looked up and said, what do you mean you got to go? You're coming back after the season, go home and see your parents, come back. I said, no, I have to go because I know I have to start investing in starting the journey of creating my own food. I don't know really what that's going to look like, but I have to do that. And he just looked up and said, listen, as a black young chef, you can work in a restaurant, but you can never own a restaurant. And I said, well, that's not possible. I'm going to do this. This is my dream. I'm not going to change my dream. I'm not going to lower my vision. And to double down, he said, hey, do you know anyone in Europe that looks like you that owns a restaurant? I said, I don't know. I'm 22 years old. I don't know a lot of people in Europe. Do you know anyone in France? I said, actually, I don't. But I looked at that, that's the opportunity, and this is my journey, and I got to go. And he said, you be back. And I was totally confused, and I called my dad, and he said, just come home to Sweden, we'll figure it out. I went home, and eventually when I got back, he said, do you know anyone in New York City? I said, I do. There's actually a Swedish restaurant there, and I know I can get a job there. And a month later, I was on my way to New York City. I was 23 years old. I had everything you needed. I had a place to work. I was loaded. I had $300. And I had 5 roommates. And I felt like I like these chances because when you come to New York, particularly at that time, it was wide open. And this idea of good food versus what people ate was constantly being challenged, not really articulated. New York City looked like this at that moment. All the high-end restaurants were in Midtown. Where most people ate was on 2nd and 3rd Avenue, was basically all versions of Italian restaurants. Chinatown didn't give a shit about any of that. It was just as vibrant as Chinatown should and can be and still is. Chinatown still don't give a shit about what happens north of Canal Street, and that's why we love Chinatown. And there was a few restaurants downtown. There was Boulé. There was places like Nobu had just opened. And I've been to Japan, and I was like, wow, that's good food. So there was this merge of that was actually possible. It was bubbling, right? And the way at Aquavit, for me, this dishes of herring and salt and pickling and preserving, it was like, how do we change that? How do we bring in people that are non-Swedish to actually enjoy and understand that food? And that, for me, was the challenge. This is pre-New Nordic. It's actually even in many ways pre-internet in a way, right? Although internet was probably invented in 95 fully, but it didn't connect with food, I would say, until 2006, when iPhone and Facebook and all of those connections really did. Before it was kind of, there's internet, but there's still the original kind of traditional media, right? In New York, it was New York Times, New York Magazine, and the Zagat Guide, right? Those were your shots of being able to reach an audience. And, in New York Times, maybe once every 4 years. In New York Magazine, maybe once or twice a year if you're really, really fortunate. And the Sagats, you get a yearly review, right? But obviously, once internet really changed how people can communicate, how consumer can get the information of the latest cocktail or the latest food you want to communicate, it really changed the dynamics of that people that didn't come from just mighty France or even Italy actually got a chance to have a voice and a say in this. And I think this is the moment that we're in right now, where if you want to love French food, you can love French food. If you want to love regional Mexican cuisine, you can love regional Mexican cuisine. My whole thing is that the cuisine, no chef in general cooks a country's cuisine anymore. People tell personal stories. That's what you find in every chef today that really are on the forefront of cooking. No one cooks a cuisine it was maybe they learned the techniques from that culture or place, but everyone cooks their authentic personal story. And everyone today is actually their version of a New York Times or a Sagat and a New York Magazine. And I think this is actually one of the best things about origin and where we are in American cooking today. So with that, Andrew, let's come up and chat.
That was great. Thank you, Marcus.
Thank you.
I know this number will change, but just so I have a sense of time that we should leave, how many people have questions in mind already? We got a lot of time. Okay. Marcus, I wonder if you sort of hinted, well, first of all, I think there's the detail you left out. Why did your father tell you to go to New York?
Good. You know, my dad said to me, you should go to New York City because Mayor Dinkins was the mayor, or just became the mayor, basically said if they vote for a black mayor, they will support a black restaurant. That's what my dad said. And he was right.
Okay. So I'd love to get your just commentary about what I'm about to say. And it kind of builds on what you just said. You know, I think maybe the defining thing that's happening in food these days in the United States is people, chefs, doing the food of their culture, of their heritage, of their personal history, without the need to put it in a French package, right? Like I think about you at Aquavit, you sort of had to do that even there, right? You were using Swedish flavors, but it was very much modern French cooking. You think about someone like the late Floyd Cardoz at Tabla, and that was radical to do a fancy Indian restaurant, but that too, he had come from L'Espinasse. That was a very technically French, right, classic package. Now I feel like that's out the window. You don't have to do that. And I think about you. I think about like at Red Rooster, the Helga's meatballs, for example. That's something you probably couldn't have served the way you serve it now much earlier. Can you just speak to this moment we're in and how you feel like your own story sort of fits into that lane?
Well, I think, you have to be curious about your food and keep evolving that, right? That's something that if you stop being curious as a creator, you're done. And you have to allow yourself to make mistakes constantly, because all of this is we're trying things out. And, in order to have a successful restaurant, you probably have to close a restaurant, right? And these juxtapositions between closing and being successful are super important, right? In sports, it happens all the time, right? You can't win in basketball if you don't lose one, right? And it's the same thing in work. And we're always afraid of that identity around failure. I actually think it's not failure to close a restaurant. People always look at the success of Red Rooster. Well, 2 years before that, I opened Mercato, which was in the meatpacking district, and without Mercato closing, there wouldn't be a Red Rooster. It was super avant, modern, what I think is modern black food, which is really tying Africa to the Caribbean to America. But guess what? There was no writers writing about that or understand. There wasn't a language for that cooking, although I knew it was delicious. But, 10 years later, you have this moment, for example. So you need all of those things. And for every person that has been here that has closed a restaurant, we all know what it feels like. It's horrendous. It eats at you, especially as the chef. It's not just the customers, right? It's the crew, that dishwasher that left another job to come and sign up with you, that server that was super excited, the vendors, all of that stuff. But once you go through that, that's kind of why that next place is going to be so vibrant. So it's very important to allow yourself to have to do all the work that it needs to land at that successful place. And your success, you have to define it, because you can, from the outside, be the most successful restaurant, but be totally miserable, and then you're not successful. So your success has to be defined by yourself.
Thanks for that. There's a story that I can't remember if I saw you speak on it or if it was written somewhere. So you were orphaned at age 3. You and your sister were taken in by a Swedish family. You were from Ethiopia. You told the story that I saw once that this time that your family made jollof rice. Right? And what that meant to you. But 3 is so young. I'm wondering if at the earliest age, if you even perceived, I don't know how many memories you could have possibly had, did you perceive an otherness about yourself in that setting? At what age did you start to become conscious of how your own personal genetic history, right, was a part of who you were? Like, at what age did that start to click in for you?
Well, I think it goes back and forth. I think adoption is very unique in a sense. You almost live your identity backwards. You, like the most basic thing, if anyone is adopted here, they can relate, but most people, the most basic things, I don't know my mom's smile, for example, or the eyes of her color, right? Basic fundamental things. But so the identity around who you are, very often as adopted, you don't speak the origin language, but once you have the food or the music, you can relate to it in a very different way. It's a very unique kind of like catch moment 22, because once you meet people from Ethiopia, you're not Ethiopian enough, and once you meet Swedes, you're not Swedish enough, right? It's kind of like this, like the Republic of New York. You're not really of America, but you are, and in this moment, we choose not to be because of many reasons. You know what I mean? But it's really, you are your own identity, and for me, going back to Ethiopia constantly every year. Now we work in Ethiopia, we have a restaurant there, we have a school there. My wife has obviously been the driving force around a lot of this, but it's really, adoption is so unique because you constantly, when you get to Ethiopia, you constantly think about, that could have been me, how would my life have been different? So it has not so much to do about, you just have to be really strong on how you compartmentalize it. What I've been able to do now as an adult is really to bring it back to my food origin, right? So with Hav Mar in New York City, that the wonderful Fariel is our executive chef, also being Ethiopian. Hav is a Swedish word, and it means ocean. Mar is an Ethiopian word, and it means honey. So I've been able to merge it to a restaurant experience that is one of one in New York City. I don't think 10 years ago I would have been able to do that, to have the language and to actually think that customers would show up for it. But that's where I think America's cooking today is, you tell personal stories that are filled with all these delicious moments, and hopefully there's a customer on the other side enjoying that.
I wonder if you could speak to, for example, there's definitely a moment that African food is having in the United States right now, unprecedented. But we see this with a lot of things, right? Like there's a company in New York, Unapologetic Foods, who have opened a handful of, all of them top-notch Indian restaurants, and they all basically are doing very traditional, regional Indian cooking, right? When you just described the concept of Hav and Mar, for example, a lot of people in the States are going to these restaurants, and they are eating this food maybe for the first time. It may be the beginning of an exploration for them, or a curiosity about whatever country's food is being served. I wonder, and you might just want to answer this for yourself, but I'm wondering also if you have a broader opinion. I'm wondering if there's a responsibility that comes with that. Is there a responsibility that if you take liberties and personalize the food to tell people, even if it's just being spieled by the server, to tell people how you're riffing on the original thing? Is there any responsibility to that, or is it all kind of the way it's been in this country for decades, where every chef can kind of take license and personalize things and do whatever they want? Does that make sense?
Sure. First, the way hospitality has been set up for 60 to 70 years, it's been advertisement campaign for Italy and France, and that's great. Actually, the average American knows more about regional Italian cooking than regional American cooking. Now, that's great for Italy. I don't know if that's great for America, right? And when an American chef wants to tell their personal story, I think we're at a moment where tell your story, cook delicious food, and now you have the opportunity to share it with the world, right? Because how does food travel, right? You either travel through massive population like India and China, through trade, which we don't really want to talk about, but it's a major part of why is Japanese food more expensive than Chinese food. It comes down to laws, very racist laws that was founded in this country, why we think Chinese food should be cheap, and Japanese food because we trade with cars, Sony, and more higher-end products. So Japanese food should be expensive, and Chinese food should be cheap, which is all rooted in really deep-rooted in racism, right? That's just honest, it's just facts. And then with Africa, we've dealt with aid, not trade. So anything that comes from the African, whether it's Caribbean or Africa, should be cheap because it's been labor to us. So, the fact that we know, if you're French, you grew up with beef bourguignon, but no American grew up with that. That's just a hat that they put on and traveled to Paris a bunch of times. No one can say on a Wednesday, oh, that's what I'm longing for if you're from Ohio. I'm sorry, you can't. This is just a funny hat. So why, what we should do today is to stop that and just enjoy the fact that, Greg is cooking Haitian food. And the kids that's gonna come out of Greg's kitchen is gonna cook amazing, whatever that is. We should enjoy that. Danny Garcia's can open Dominican halal bodega in New York. That's what New York City should be about. We need more Dominican halal bodegas. Do you know what I mean? Like, those are the moments that you feel like you're living and you're breathing, and it's vibrancy that we need. So whatever stories each personal chef wants to tell, should tell, because it's authentic to their experience, right? And that's why I think it's very, very powerful. We've had this, for years we've had this, that Jonathan Johnson from Milwaukee is cooking Italian food. Great. If he's been to Italy and has experienced that and that's what he wants to do, he should. So I think that, when you have these mashups of what America truly is, and Miami truly is a bunch of mashups, that should be celebrated. And it's the highest. Open a restaurant is a privilege. No one needs another restaurant. It's such a privilege. And when you get that moment as a chef or an owner or as a lead position, lean into this privilege, lean into your pride, lean into your je ne sais quoi and what got you at. Lean into both the humility of serving, but also to the arrogance how you got to this place. Because you're gonna need both, And people will always have an opinion, so there's no point of even value one opinion more than the other. If you get many opinions that, hey, the food comes out cold or the service is too long, well, those are opinions you should learn from. But when somebody really thinks that this is the right food for you to cook, I don't give a shit. You know what I mean? I don't.
So when you talk to young chefs, young cooks, aspiring chef owners, right? Everyone here probably knew this. The general public got a crash course at the beginning of COVID when we saw so many places didn't even have a week's salary in the bank, right? This is a business of very small margins. In certain places, New York is one of them. The cost to open a restaurant, you're really taking a big chance. And I feel like, and this isn't a critical statement, I totally get the psychology behind it, but I feel like there's a little bit of people hedging their bets. Not everybody, but a lot of people are opening restaurants, and there's a little bit of a sameness. There's less daring, I feel like, in some cases. I'm wondering if you encounter this from young people. Do you encounter a hesitancy to just fully commit to, this is who I am, this is the kind of thread I want to pull on, this is what I want to explore about my own heritage? Do you sense any kind of a hesitancy that's based in the business part of having a restaurant?
No, those are two separate. When I deal with, the average people that we work with is about 24, and between back and front, and I feel people are super excited to be part of hospitality. The great thing for young people today is that they have other options. They might work in hospitality, and then go and work for a tech firm and do hospitality for them. There's more options, right? The reason why people work in restaurants and where they go after, and maybe eventually they come back to, I just think it's great that people have more options, And figuring out, when you're in the mid-20s, you shouldn't have the responsibility of thinking through payroll or thinking through what's the latest trends. You need all that canvas to learn and make mistakes. And working in a restaurant, you make mistakes very often on some other person's dime. We've all done it, right? And I think it's a very important time for your development. I think that the restaurant scene in America in general is the most vibrant it's ever been, because it's not connected to 5 blocks. You think about Miami, you can bring up 10 different neighborhoods that has great restaurants. 10 years ago, that wasn't the story. The restaurants were maybe in Brickell, maybe 1 or 2 in Wynwood, maybe 1 or 2 on the beach, and it was connected to just certain areas. Today, there are so many, and I think that's because people are curious. Young restaurateur goes to neighborhood where they can afford to build something fabulous. And this, just like Will talked about the origin story of a pop-up becoming, and all the fun nights, all the mistakes, and all the connectivity he did with his team during that journey, really was all dressed rehearsal to become this iconic place called Sonny's, right? It's also super, super important stories, because everyone in this room and the teams in this room that they go back to, they can relate to that more than saying, hey, we got a $6 million check and now we're gonna build this restaurant. That's a fantasy story. But creating a pop-up with real authenticity and journey of struggles, and the guest has an opportunity to be with you through that journey, is massive, So you have to take risk. Working in hospitality is part of taking risk.
Thanks for that. Sorry, sidebar. Can I ask, can we get a bottle of water from Marcus?
Thank you.
Somebody? Thanks. He's flying, so he needs to hydrate. Thank you. Here you go.
But I want to give you an example, right?
Sure.
You're from Haiti, right? Yes. So Haiti has, for me, the most incredible mushroom, right, John John, and therefore the most incredible rice, John John. And every time I cook that, the person, if they're not from the Caribbean, it's like, oh, it's like a risotto. And my whole head goes also like, at what point are we going to come to a time when the reference point is not European, right? And it doesn't mean that the person who's asking me that question is mean or anything. The person is curious. But the link, if you've ever had a John John, it is by far the most handsome, better version of risotto you can ever have, right? John John is incredible. And it has these mushrooms that only grows on Española, right? And it's incredible. So I just like, so our information task is upside down. It's not correct, it's upside down.
Well, I mean, that's an interesting point, right? There was an episode, I don't know how many people who are listening, I think it's so smart and entertaining, the Chef's Cut podcast with Adrian Cheatham and Joe Flam.
Yeah.
But Adrian brought up this point recently that, and she brought it up as a question, but it was an interesting point. Probably the rating system globally that has the most respect is considered, maybe the most objective is the Michelin Guide, is considered. But she brought up this point that there is a total blind spot with them, and it's the kind of thing you were just talking about, that if it doesn't lean toward the classic European format, there's not really, maybe you'll get a star here and there, but it's not evaluated on its own terms. And I'm just wondering if that resonates with you, if you feel like there's a gap in how restaurants are, beyond the individual dishes, just how, like for example, people say, someone will take their food and fancify it a little bit, right? And writers will refer to that as elevated, when they start imposing French technique on something, right? And I always tell people, don't call it elevated. It's just a different thing.
Yeah, I mean, I would say like this. If you think about, first of all, what is Michelin? It's a tire company. It makes tires. So let's just let that sink in for a second. It's a French tire company that sets standards and wants people to travel and eat French food. So they are doing their job. They are not shy about being pro-France. They should. It's a French company that's making tires. They want us to go to France. So they are telling us, and the fact that we all want to chase that, that's not their fault. That's on us. So one of the blessings of being Black is that you are never considered in anything of that. So therefore, the blessing is you don't have to participate. Do your own thing. And we have the power. I mean, every person in here has the power because they have followers and they build their communities. And I think Michelin is amazing for up-and-coming people to learn. I look at all the 2, 3-star, 1-star as classrooms where you can learn a lot. You can learn a lot from street cooking, and you can learn, it's not either or, right? But to chase it as your business that is so out of control, big cultures that moves us have never looked at the establishment. I mean, think about that. Everybody in this room has been moved of, the biggest pop culture today is hip hop. It's not like hip hop looked at the establishment in order to get into the room. They did their own thing. And this is constantly evolving. It's not like Jean-Michel Basquiat said, oh, my graffiti or street art is not the same as now street art is the culture. Look at Wynwood. Where would Wynwood be without street art? No one would go to Wynwood. It was a major part of it, right? So real things that really moves culture is not founded by establishments. It's actually an origin culture. If you look at music today, you look at Afrobeat, you look at Amapiano, things that really moves people forward. If Afrobeat would wait for Billboard or Grammys, Africa's like, we're gonna do this, and then pop culture comes to that. Food is the same thing. You have to really do your own thing and have enough, like I said, humility here to do the work, and arrogance and self-belief here, and then jump forward into the world. If you don't do that, no one's gonna believe you. What Will did, he didn't have enough humility to be there working, grinding, but enough arrogance to say, screw all of this is my rules, this is my party. Sundays wouldn't have been Sundays, you know what I mean? So it's like every single one, we talk about Diego and Nikke and the Peruvian incredible. If it wouldn't be those mashup of cultures, it wouldn't have happened. Everything that we've drawn from did not start from establishment, it started from underground. You think about house music, where does that come from? It comes from parties, underground parties in Detroit, and today it's like blown up as one of the biggest things. So establishment is great, but that's one of the blessings as a Black person you have, is that the establishment never, ever had you in mind. And for me, it's just like, good, well, I don't have you in mind.
We have a couple minutes. Does anyone have anything they'd like to ask Marcus? Let's go here in the front. Yeah, it's you.
Hi. I'm just so amazed. I remember I was in New York in 2006 when Red Rooster, I think, opened around that time. And I mean, your career has just gone through so many turns, so many changes. You've reinvented yourself so many times. Where do you find, what is that moment for you that says, I'm ready to do my next thing? How do you recognize that?
I think through those pauses, there was a moment at Aquavit where I felt like as a black person in fine dining, I didn't tell the story that I wanted to tell. And looking into it, it looked great. We had another 3-star review from New York Times. The restaurant was packed. We had our tasting menus. But I was like, I wanted to tell food from Africa a little bit more. What does that look like? And how do I twinkle this to what is African-American culture? Where do I fit in that? It was a lot of those questions. And in that process, I'm very slow. So it took so I moved to Harlem in 2002. And Harlem has great people and great institutions. So I could study the menus from the Renaissance at Schaumburg. Apollo is up the street, Studio Museum, So I could do that journey as slowly, as long as I wanted to. And I think I needed all of those 2010s to really get to Red Rooster. And I knew we needed to have open kitchens so people could see. Because I've experienced in New York where there's tons of people of color working, but most kitchens were closed. And we lived in that fantasy time where it was the chef and then everybody else. And I'm like, let's open this up. And it created this platform where a lot of great hospitality. You talk about Adrian. Adrian was working at Rooster for years, and a lot of great people. A young woman, Rashida, she has the #1 ramen spot in New York right now. She came out of that kitchen. Tristan, the just won Top Chef, came out of that kitchen. So it's like a tradition of all of these ambitious people coming out of this kitchen. But during the pandemic, again, pause. I was really thinking about, as a person with privilege that has opportunities, the people I never saw in fine dinings were, in France, was women and people of color. And I said, with Red Rooster, we solved that piece, but we could have done more for women in the industry. And Havmar is totally committed to have all-female leadership, right? So our executive chef, our GM, our head bar are all women. And I don't think if I would have that pause of the pandemic that I could really take a beat, really think through what is next and how can it not just be next for me, but actually transform a little part of transforming and improving the industry, right? Each restaurant, in my view, should add to the industry, but also solve an issue that wasn't there before, right? And that's what I know with Havmar that we're working towards all the time. And the culture of Havmar is very different than the culture of Red Rooster or Metropolis. And it's because of Tia, Fran, and Farial.
Do you still have your mic? Can you just hand it actually to the gentleman right behind you? Right there.
So many questions. If you actually could open up a concept where we kind of book a table just to have 30 minutes to ask you things, that would be great.
That's called a podcast.
Okay.
Yeah.
I got to start listening to your podcast more often then.
Yeah.
My question is, how can you mentioned John from Milwaukee who cooks Italian food, and that's okay. But can John from Milwaukee cook Haitian food or Nigerian food or the food of a people of color or an oppressed minority, even if that is part of their story? And how does he do that responsibly? How does a chef cook outside of their culture or heritage responsibly? And how do they communicate that effectively to the public without avoiding backlash? And did you experience any of that when you opened Red Rooster with not having grown up as a Black American?
Yeah. No, I think the answer is yes, you can do all of those things, right? But it's also like, how do you gather that information and who are you working with and who are you highlighting, whether it's the vendors, the team? How did you get to that, right? Let's just say you and I will do a steamed bass marinated in sambal and with the coconut rice, right? So you have to then really think about the fishermen from Montauk, but you also have to think about what is the origin of the sambal? Where did it come from? Did it come from Indonesia? Did it come from how did it get there? And who are the amazing people that got you there? Is there a line cook that you did this recipe with that happens to be from that part of the world, right? So it's all about storytelling and including those amazing coworkers that dishwasher from, let's say, Ethiopia is not just a dishwasher. He also sits on berbere, injera, fermentation. Fermentation is not something that was invented in Copenhagen. It's been around us forever, all over the world, right? So we can talk about it, because if we're going to do something that is from Europe, it requires already, we have to study it, we have to know it, we have to respect it. Well, if you do something out of Africa, out of the Caribbean, you have to do the same thing and highlight the people that were behind it. So I think, yes, John from Milwaukee can do that, but then do the homework, engage with the people from those communities, and with a general interest, right? And I think you will be celebrated. And there will be awkward stumbling blocks, absolutely. You know, I'll tell you, before we opened Red Rooster, I was trying to do this duck dish. And I was like, really doing this duck dish, but we couldn't execute as a team. And I was like standing in the kitchen, like, guys, come on, man, when you gotta render the fat. You know, when you've had duck before. And I realized I'm the only one out of those 22 people that have had duck before. Who's the idiot now? So I had to change, no duck dish, because we can't execute it. Maybe 2 years later we could have executed it. So you have to, as a chef, not just forcing what you're gonna do, but does this make sense at this place, at this time?
One more question, right in front here. Where's our microphone? Oh, right here in the front.
Hi, Chef. I'm curious to know, when you've been back to Ethiopia, did you gather with some families, the community, and watch them cook and learn some different methods of cooking? And were you surprised with one method and you were like, oh, this is where they get the flavor from, or like just traditional cooking style that you were inspired by their cooking?
Yes. So in my family, I'm the 5th best Ethiopian cook, right? So when we have the holidays, my wife's sisters, that all come in, and they're basically like our pots, pans, and knives. And then they're impressed at the fact that I can chop the onion. Everything else, they are doing the way they would do it back home. And every time I learn something, whether it's around fermentation, or whether using an ingredient like false banana incense, which is superfood, has been around for thousands of years. It eventually will come here, and it will be a superfood here as well. Different types of textures that could be strange to me, but it's not strange of the place, right? So when I go to Ethiopia and cook, not every time, but sometimes I cook at this place which is really where 2,000 people get fed food. And when you cook with those chefs, their kitchen's very simple, so you have to do it their way, and the food always comes out very super delicious. But yeah, I mean, when we cook on the countryside, I'm constantly the one gathering and not the one leading the kitchen. And they always laugh at me like, did you bring the knives? Did you bring the pots and pans? And yes, every time we bring pots and pans and knives, and they're like, okay, go and sit over there. So, but I love it. You learn something every time, So I think the curiosity of that is fun. Absolutely.
All right. Does anyone have a question that could be asked and answered in about 3 minutes? Okay.
Thank you. I'm leaning into my arrogant shoulder that you mentioned.
Good.
My passion is connecting farms with chefs. Really curious to hear your thoughts, experience on, especially as somebody encouraging very deeply personal identity that might often lean into regional cooking that might not be taking place in such a region. How are you thinking about bringing in the land, the gifts of the land, to your story as a chef?
Yeah, we have a place in Bahamas where the fisherman froze the fish, sent it to New York, and then flew it back to Bahamas, and maybe sat at the airport. It wasn't frozen anymore, and then it came back to the restaurant frozen. I was like, every part of this process is wrong. And it doesn't take a rocket science to understand the fish is fished here. We should pull the fish to this place, and then we should store it, you know? And so many of world's food trading actually functions the way that example of Bahamas, right? So as a chef, one of your main jobs is to really figure out, okay, how can I erupt that and make sure that, you know, I get not only seasonal food, but also food from the place, of the place, and figure out how I can trade, because obviously a restaurant is a market. For that vendor, it could be life-changing. So doing that in the most efficient way looks different depending where you are, right, based on the opportunities and how that is. But I think there's never been a better time to do it, because small vendors can trade up today in a way that they couldn't do before. And then a lot of chefs, through their curiosity, are seeking out specialty vendors. So I think we're in a better place than we were before, but obviously not. They can always be improved on. That was 3 minutes.
I was going to say, if you just want another 39 seconds, we could have a buzzer beater.
It's such a thought out question, so it's really hard to answer quickly.
All right, can everyone please join me in thanking Marcus Samuelsson?
Thank you. Thank you, Andrew. Thank you so much. Thank you. That was fun. Thank you.